Virginia Trioli. We're coming to you live from Melbourne tonight with a great studio audience. Joining me on the panel, family violence campaigner and 2015 Australian of the Year, Rosie Batty. Liberal member for Higgins, Katie Allen, who's been up half the night crossing the floor. Sporting icon and Australian of the Year, Alcott. And joining us live from Sydney, co-chair of the Indigenous Voice, Calma, and Shadow Minister for Education and Women, Tanya Plibersek, who's in isolation at home and also had a very late finish last night as well. Great to have you all here. Thanks for being here.
Hi everyone. There's been a lot of criticism of Grace Tame for not being gracious with Scott Morrison and for sharing some of the power tactics people tried to exercise over her during her year as Australian of the Year. Should the Australian of the Year be bold and fearless in the eye of criticism, or should they shrink to the back and nod their head even to the most powerful in the land? Is it about speaking the truth or speaking what others want you to say? What does the panel think? Where does this place you, Dylan, as you start your Australian of the Year? How do you look to start? With a clean pair of aces or some foul shots?
Nice sport reference, I like it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your question, I appreciate it as well. First and foremost, I love that Grace is Grace. She's really proud of the person that she is, and to be honest, she's been through a lot as well. And I was really proud watching yesterday both her and Brittany speak, first and foremost because they've been through a huge trauma in their life that is really hard to always bring up. And I can't begin to think what they've been through, but I've been discriminated against. I did get bullied as a kid, and when I have to talk about those things, it can be really hard. And to be that vulnerable has to be first and foremost respected, but listened to. And that's something that, I don't know Brittany, but I do know Grace, and I'm really proud and lucky to call her a mate, and I think she's done an amazing job as Australian of the Year. If I could be 1/8 the Australian of the Year that she's done, I think I would have done my job. What I will say is the way that I'm going to do it is I'm just going to be me. I don't know how to be anybody else. And I used to pretend I was someone else growing up. I hated myself. I hated my disability. I wanted to be like my brother who wasn't in a wheelchair. And then I actually just started embracing my disability and being myself. And mate, I'm so bloody honoured to be Australian of the Year. I still can't believe it. I honestly can't. Sitting there with Rosie Batty, she's a queen to me. And just incredible. And what I will say is I'm going to speak my truth too, and whether that's to power or to anybody in the way that I do it. And I'm really excited about the opportunity. And to be honest, I can't do anything myself. It's a team effort. It's all of us. It's a we. And I can't wait to amplify the voices of other people with disabilities as well.
And Dylan, does that mean then, from time to time, going to the spirit of the question, being a difficult presence, being an argumentative, uncomfortable presence, is that part of being you and part of doing this role?
1000%. If people disrespect or don't support my community, which is people with disabilities, of course I'm going to stick up for them and do what I need to do. And to be honest, I didn't need Australian of the Year to do that. I've always done that, and
that's true.
I am pretty honoured that I did get it. And I just want to hopefully make everybody proud in what I can do this year.
Rosie, I want to turn to you. Brittany Higgins paid homage to you in her speech. I just wonder how that felt and how it's felt for you as a former Australian of the Year, watching Grace Tame do it in a very different way to you.
Look, I was very honoured, and I have met with Grace as well, and it's really great that they acknowledge that there are women who've gone before that have made it possible for them to have a voice, as women have gone before me. Yes, I did it differently to Grace, but I was also very fearless and very forthright. There was a different government, different leadership, different prime ministers. I spent my time backwards and forwards in Canberra, working on legislative change, working on funding cuts, working in varying ways to amplify the voices of victims of family violence. It was an incredible honour, and I have sat with some discomfort, in quite frank, being honest. I haven't always understood why I've been uncomfortable. I think it's a really interesting...
Uncomfortable at?
Some of Grace's approach. And it's her
anger, her evident anger.
I'm not sure whether it's anger or passion or forthrightness, but that doesn't mean that it's a criticism. It means I'm acknowledging I'm not sure about this. And yeah, as Grace said, as Dylan said, he will do it his way. The most important thing is she has authenticity and she's doing it her way. I did it with authenticity, I did it my way. Advocacy is in many different forms with many different approaches. There is not one way fits all and there is not one approach that works. And so it's ultimately what Grace and Brittany have been able to do is really invigorate feminism and role modelling for young women.
Before I move on to the rest of the panel, you did say publicly, you were quoted publicly, uncomfortable with the way that Grace Tame behaved at the Australian of the Day, the Australian Year Next Award, and where she gave the Prime Minister that epic side eye. Have you and Grace Tame made contact since, and have you discussed that with her?
We did talk about something which was not that particular event, but certainly I think she held me up as a really great role model and she was really quite hurt. I felt my article was really quite balanced because it's actually full of admiration. But sometimes that isn't the way that I would have done it, but that doesn't mean to say that she did the wrong thing. And why should we all agree if we don't agree? And I guess what I felt was, I've been on Australian of the Year. I understood, I think it is a great honour. I wouldn't have thought to do that. However, look at what she's been able to do because she did do that. So I can reserve the right to rethink how I felt. I can reserve the right to go, well, you know what, maybe I was wrong, because there's a hell of a lot of people think she was right. And so, yeah, I can be brave enough to say, I'm not sure. But just because I may not have done it that way doesn't mean to say it wasn't the right thing to do.
Tom Calma, can I get you to join in? Because I could see that you were responding quite vocally to that. What are you thinking?
Yeah, look, I don't have an issue with the way that she behaved. And I think what the audience and Australia needs to understand is that whilst the Prime Minister bestows the award, they don't have, the government, the Commonwealth Government, doesn't have a say over who gets appointed, and there's a very rigorous process. And I've been chair in the ACT on the panels down there, and the process is very rigorous and is standardised across Australia. And I think anybody who gets to be a finalist is well and truly deserving, as are all the other nominees. They're fantastic, and it's important that they're able to behave and continually practice what they were doing prior to coming onto the national platform, which is important. We don't want people to change their behaviour and their advocacy and their interests just because they've got the national award. And I say, go for it.
Well, then maybe something has changed, because I think up until recent years, maybe we as a community have regarded the Australian of the Year as a lovely honour and a titular thing, and now go out and have a lovely year and say nice things about your area of interest. It's a platform now, and it's a platform now for powerful change and uncomfortable change, is it, Tom?
Yeah, no, definitely. And look, it's so important for governments of all persuasions, both at the central level and the state and territory level, to hear what people like the Australian of the Year have to say, because they also go on a tour. They hear a lot of people and what their views are, which either support or oppose their view. And so they become a vehicle to be able to get the community's interest fed back into the Parliament. So I think the governments should feel privileged that they're able to have people like the Australians of the Year providing very candid and direct advice to them.
I'm going to start taking notes. This is good stuff, Tom. You can keep us up all night, all right?
We're going to get Tom to give you a whole lot of notes tonight.
Good. I'm into this.
Given as a nominee, he'll be able to help you out there. Tanya Plibersek, can I bring you in here? First of all, your response to those really incendiary speeches by Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame, and to the heart of the question about being a bit of a rat bag if you have that role.
Well, I think the two speeches at the Press Club this week were absolutely brilliant, and I'm so impressed by and proud of this generation of young women who are leading big change in Australia. And here's the thing about Australian of the Year. I really do wish we were talking as much now about child sexual abuse as we are about Grace Tame giving the Prime Minister side-eye, because the reason Grace Tame was asked to be Australian of the Year, the same way Rosie was asked to be Australian of the Year, same way Dylan was asked to be the Australian of the Year, is because they are leading big social change. And big social change doesn't come easily. It comes after a lot of hard work, and sometimes that means ruffling some feathers along the way. And we can't ask these incredible change makers to become Australian of the Year and then just sit quietly for a year and not continue their work, their passion to change Australia for the better. So, look, it's a tough gig. You walk in quite often without a lot of experience of being on TV or representing the country, and you're thrown into it at the deep end. So I think Grace Tame has done a fantastic job. I'm so impressed by her. I'm so proud to call Rosie and Dylan my friends. I'm so impressed by the work they've done and the way they have used their platforms in the past, and I hope it continues.
It's such a different way of doing business as a female leader, the way that Grace Tame has done it and Brittany Higgins has done it. Tanya Plibersek, if you add up all your years in politics and all the stuff that you must have walked past from time to time or been horrified by or even called out at the time, does it make you wish that you'd done things differently, that you'd channeled some of that rage, that evident anger that we see now from Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins?
I've got a daughter who's in her early 20s, and I do feel such sadness and shame that we haven't fixed it for this generation of young women yet. As Rosie said earlier, generations have worked on this problem of child sexual abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault. We have worked on these problems for years, and yet we haven't achieved what we should have as a nation. And I genuinely hope that this is an inflection point, a moment in time where we can capture the rage of so many women, the people who turned out in the March for Justice close to a year ago now, who marched on Parliament House. They were grandmothers, they were mothers, they were young women, and just saying enough is enough. It's time for change in this nation, and I really do hope we take that opportunity to make real change now.
Katie Allen, can I ask you, is there a generational inflection going on here? Is there a generational shift in the way that some younger women now are prepared to be grumpy, angry, to not please, to not want to make nice, that is contrasting with perhaps our generation?
Look, I absolutely think there's been a Me Too moment that Brittany Higgins has led, and it's arisen in Parliament. I think the Me Too movement has sort of arisen in different sectors around the world. I think in the US it was in the arts and communication area and just happened to be in Parliament. I think that there's misogyny and sexism right across the world and right across Australia. But I feel more hopeful for women because I see that there's definitely been generational change. And, if you go back 100 years, I had a cousin who was, first UK minister in cabinet, and she didn't have children, she never married, because she had to choose between a career and a family. And, we haven't had enough gains, that's for sure. But if I look to my mother's generation, they had to quit work once they got pregnant. I mean, it's completely changed in one generation. So, thousands of years of human evolution, and we're looking at a social revolution in the last 30 to 50 years. And if I look at the last 5 to 6 years, it's been massive. And you now have this young generation of women who the glass ceiling's been broken, well and truly, and they're getting mad about what they want to see and what they want to do. But I also think there's this sort of acceptance of not being categorised, like you be you. I think that's really important. And young people don't want to be categorised. They want to be who they want to be, and they are very comfortable with self-expression and individualism. I've got a couple of daughters, and they can't understand why things don't move more quickly, so they do get frustrated. But I'm a paediatrician by training, and I remember seeing at a conference once this paragraph talking about the old generation are too slow, and they look to the younger generation and think, how hopeless are they? The world's going to go, to hell in a handbasket. And it was from 300 BC. I mean, there's always generational change. That's the great thing about the world.
Just before I move on to our next question, we've heard from the government they're not going to investigate further the suggestion that, or the allegation that Grace Tame made that she was strong-armed, she was threatened by someone senior in the government-funded organisation to make nice and not to say anything at the Australia Day event that would make Scott Morrison uncomfortable. Anne Ruston said this morning that she had to give details of what went on before that they could investigate further. Does that seem fair to you?
I just think what happened to Grace is just not on. I mean, it's just unacceptable.
So how should the government investigate that to make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else?
Well, and I think that's the difficulty, isn't it? If someone doesn't want to pursue it, then that's up to Grace. But, it would be helpful if we did know, because that sort of thing just should never happen.
Do you think that the government can investigate this as best it can without relying on Grace Tame to give up a name?
Well, I think...
Is there an obligation on the government to do that?
Well, no, I think Anne Ruston has actually asked Grace, could you tell us, or even the Prime Minister has asked, well, which institution at least, because then we can make sure that we have a little sort of, please, be aware this is not appropriate. So I think Grace hasn't told us which federally funded organisation it is, and it's better not to make guesses on these things. But on the other hand, I think the conversation should be pretty clear to the community, is that sort of thing's just not acceptable.
Tom Calma, I'll just very quickly come to you on that, your response, and then I'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, look, I agree totally, and the government should take a position to publicly announce that this is just not acceptable. Anybody who wants to do things on behalf of government, they're either endorsed to do it, or if they're not, don't put themselves up as if they're representing the government and the government of the day. And I think the issue for me is that and media's got a role to play in this as well. The focus on the individual rather than the issue, and it's the issues that both these young ladies have raised that we should be focusing on, and we are giving them attention, or the government is. But let's move away from the character assassinations and the second guessing as to why, okay. and look at the issue.
People of faith already have some of the strongest protections in this country. What this bill will do is allow discrimination in the name of faith, not only towards LGBTIQ plus folk, but also women, unmarried parents, people living with a disability, people from multicultural backgrounds, and people of other faiths. My question is to you, Tanya Plibersek. How could you and your party support this legislation, albeit with a few amendments, when it was possible that with the support of a few Liberals crossing the floor, you could have voted it down?
That's from Jen Van Achteren. Over to you, Tanya Plibersek.
Well, Jen's speaking from Tasmania, which does have religious protection, state-based legislation, but actually in lots of parts of Australia, people of faith don't have any protection at all. And we do think that people of faith need to have protection from discrimination and vilification, just as every Australian deserves to be protected. Jen's talking about women, people who are gay or lesbian. It is Labor that introduced the Sex Discrimination Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, because we think every Australian should be treated fairly. Every Australian should feel safe. Every Australian should be included. Right now in Sydney, if you're a Muslim woman sitting on a train and someone yells at you for wearing hijab, you've got no protection under the law from that. It's not fair that some Australians should feel unsafe.
Well, I'll just jump in there. I mean, there are assault laws, of course. So, I mean, under assault laws,
just
one
could... Someone.
Yeah, but, I mean, a verbal assault you can still go to police if you have evidence with that. But, look, I mean, the question went to, I guess, having it both ways. I mean, you made the amendments, but you let it go through. Were you trying to have it both ways with the way that you played it, rather than getting rid of this legislation altogether?
Well, we would like to see protections for all Australians. We want every Australian to feel safe and included, and that does include people of faith. We've said all along that we want to see protections for people of faith from discrimination and vilification, but they should not come at the expense of any other Australian. So our amendments went to better protecting children, and I'm really pleased that Katie and a number of other Liberals joined with the crossbenchers and voted with Labor to give protection for all children. We had a number of other amendments that went to aged care and other pieces of the legislation. It's up to Scott Morrison now to decide whether he wants to compromise and offer protection to people of faith without reducing protections to other Australians.
All right, well, it looks like
it's all too hard.
It looks like the legislation's probably been shelved, and certainly nothing can happen with it before we get to the election, and maybe Katie Allen can illuminate us on that. What's its future now?
Well, we've got, the Senate can't sit next week because there's an estimates, and then we've got 3 days, which is budget week. I think there's only 2 sitting days for the Senate, so there's 2 days.
So that's it. So it's dead. Yeah. How did it feel?
I don't like to use those sorts of words, but yes, I mean, it's hard
my phrase. At least before the election, and then depended on the government getting government back. How did it feel crossing the floor with your colleagues in defiance of your Prime Minister? He's personally very wedded to this legislation.
Well, I actually feel it's a very interesting mix of emotions, to be fair. It's hard to explain it.
You look happy.
I do. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I feel like I've stood up for what I believe in.
Good job.
Your Prime Minister won't be happy with you. I mean, you're happy, but he ain't.
I've had lots of conversations with the Prime Minister, and I suppose what I feel really thrilled about is the whole process. Our democracy does work, and I'm there representing the people of Higgins, and that's 110,000 people. But there are also other people representing other people with different views, and the contest of ideas is why I've gone to Parliament, and we've had that contest of ideas. And at the end of the day, you have to have a vote.
Can I just add in there, you said obviously thrilled with the process, but some people who weren't thrilled were the people that got hurt by the bill to start with. I think a bill that protected some people from discrimination, but indirectly or directly discriminated another group, is a crap bill that needs to go in the bin the best of the time. And you can see the emotion. Obviously, it's important to do, but it might not need to get to that level sometimes when you actually think about holistically how it could affect people.
Dylan, tell us about that date you went on when you were 16.
Yeah, so I actually went on a date when I was, because this bill actually discriminated against people with disability, because in some very, very traditional parts of religion, we are a spawn of Satan because our parents did something wrong or we did something wrong. And I went on a date to Chats and Stop Shopping Centre.
Chatty.
Killed it, went to Nando's, nailed it. And we left and a preacher was there and started screaming at me that I was a spawn of Satan.
No.
And prayed for me and my date and told my date that it was a bad idea, that they were with me, because that was the religion they believed. And when I saw this bill, I was like, that actually somewhat protects some people to talk like that. Can confirm though, successful date somehow. So yeah.
Maybe the pastor closed the deal.
It worked for me.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But back to you, Katie Allen. I mean, if the Prime Minister can't get his team behind him, all his team, on a piece of legislation that is so important to him, and that he's decided to make the centrepiece of just these brief few days in Parliament before an election is called, what does that say about his authority?
Well, the Liberal Party, as John Howard has said, and it's been repeated many times after, is, it's a broad church, and we are a party.
Yeah, but it's a church that actually has to get done the stuff that the Prime Minister wants to get done, right?
Yeah, but I mean, there's also, there's the sort of moving forward of democracy. So there has been, and look, I take your point, Dylan, that whenever we have a conversation about really sensitive issues, whether it's, Grace Tame talking about her incredibly traumatic past, there will be people who'll be triggered by that, or the awful things that you have had to experience. I mean, shocking, really, in modern Australia. How absolutely.
But this wasn't
appalling.
triggering. This was legislation that actually enabled that as an institutionalised discrimination. That's a different thing altogether. So the point about discussing these things,
I kind of am someone who believes that it's important to shine a light, and so
I think Dylan's point was about introducing it in the first place, wasn't it, rather than discussing it?
Yeah,
Rosie,
but I think there are people who literally believe things that, in my view, I don't feel comfortable with. But having the conversation is important to bring Australians together.
I think for many, it's sickening that we're even having this debate, and I think it's incredibly harmful to so many, and it reminds people of the plebiscite and all of the discourse and discussion and analysing, when really this is everybody should be able to be safe and accepted for exactly who they are. And I think as we enjoy the debate, it's incredibly damaging for those who are transgender or queer or on the spectrum of diversity in whatever way, shape or form it looks like. And I think that is what's really hurtful. And it must be terrible to think as a society, we've gone beyond this surely, but we know we have not. And it's a really slow process, I think. And I just find I find it distressing listening to everybody having a point of view about this. And what would I know? This is not a world I understand. But young people are so embracing of this, and you've talked about your children. Their difference, their gender fluidity, it's not an issue for them. Why on earth are we banging on constantly about an issue that should never be raised and a problem? And I understand what Tanya was saying about, that this is, no one should be discriminated for whatever they are. But as we may enjoy and think we should shine a spotlight on some topics, it is really, really harmful. And we know, from what I understand, and I'm no expert, suicides rise every time this kind of debate occurs, because it sends a message that you're still not acceptable in today's society.
I'm a business owner in the construction industry. A year ago, we had someone trial with us with a disability. We had to let him go to the fact that we just simply didn't have enough resources to be taken up. I still feel guilty about letting him go. People with disabilities have really good qualities, but due to the financial ramifications of the extra resources, we just couldn't make it work. My question is, what, if any, incentives are there financially to employ people with disability, and does more need to be done in this area?
Mate, thanks so much for your question. Thanks for being honest as well about what happened, first and foremost. I really appreciate that. Look, man, I've got 3 things that I want to achieve as Australian of the Year, to try and better the life of people with disability. First and foremost, it is to have a fully funded, guaranteed, but most importantly, demand-driven NDIS. So people with disability can get what they need so they can go out and be the people they want to be. I'd love both sides of Parliament to guarantee that before the election, because people forget it's actually an investment in people with disabilities so they can get the resources, Josh, so they can get out there and live their lives. For every dollar spent on the NDIS, $2.25 goes back into the economy, like at your workplace, for example. $52 billion was generated last year because of the NDIS. Like, it's a no-brainer to me, but unfortunately, people talk about the fact that it is expensive, and that makes it hard for us. And it's not so people can buy a nice car. It's so people with disability can have a shower every morning. So young kids with disability, high-level disabilities, don't have to live in nursing homes or aged care facilities, And that breaks my heart when I hear things like that, and it's important. And the NDIS actually helps get people the skills so they can get out there and work better for people like you. Secondly, as we start opening up, I'm so excited that we are opening up for this, but for people with disability to be able to go out and get a job, they've got to get the PPE and the free rat tests and the vaccine so they are protected, so they can get out there and start being the people they want to be. But more important than that, there are people that are currently at home who won't go outside because they might die.
Yeah.
Like, people are dying. And that, look, I get it. When I get told they're going to get 2 rat tests for their family a week, it's like, get them whatever they need so they can do what they want to do. It's not hard, yeah? You would agree with that? I think everybody would agree with that, And thirdly, as you're talking about, which is something that I've been passionate about for a while, mate, is more employment opportunities for people with disabilities.
Josh, let me come back to you. So what would have helped in that situation? I mean, I get you're busy and everyone's flat out and you'd like to help this new guy.
Yeah, so in our case, it would have taken probably 2 people to help get them going and train them up. So probably some financial incentive up front without having to wait 4 to 6 months for incentives to come through. Right,
so some money to come through so you could take on 2 more people.
That would come in for us, go directly to someone else's wage.
Yeah.
Straight up.
And that's the whole, look, there's 4.5 million people like me, Joshie, with a disability in this country. Only 54% of them are involved in the workforce, right?
Yeah.
I'm 31 years old. That participation rate has not moved in 31 years.
I think if we want to improve the quality of life for people with disability, employment would be a huge factor.
But also, it's not just the fact that the quality of life, not just for the remuneration, but how good's having a job? You got mates, yeah? You get out, you get fit, you start living your life. I'm so lucky that I've got a job, right? And I employ people with disabilities and that. But it can be easily fixed, man. There's a bunch of things we can do. And you know what? Already doing things with government and already talked to Tanya, and both sides of Parliament are trying to help this thing, but it's easy. First and foremost, government, corporates, and most importantly, C-suite and managers have got to leave their unconscious bias at the door, like you did. and give people with disability a chance. But there's got to be more funding streams so you can get the support that you need. Things like quotas work really well, things like training programs. And I think, look, there's a new national disability strategy that's about to come out, and there's a big part of this, right? Because people with disability as well, we often just give them a job at the front or whatever that is, right? And we love that. But why can't we have a career? Why can't we talk about this stuff at school? You know, and I think it's really important. And you talking about it changes that for people.
A great panel, that's all we have time for. So please, thanks to our panel, Katie Allen, Rosie Batty, Dylan Alcott, and in Sydney, Tom Calma and Tanya Plibersek. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And thanks for all of your questions as well, they were terrific. Next week, Stan Grant will be with you live from Sydney, looking at why some voters are feeling left behind by the major parties. He'll be joined by Liberal MP Dave Sharma, his independent challenger Allegra Spender, and Chris Bowen. And you can join me tomorrow morning on ABC Radio Melbourne. So stay safe, good night, and go well.